Hello and welcome. Another time, Ukrainian forces crossed the border into Russia and were fighting Russian troops there, while Prigozhin and Kadyrov start slugging it out against each other, as Kadyrov is apparently taking over the role from Prigozhin, now starting to take a more active role with his Kadyrovtsi on the front line, trying to capture specific positions along the front line. This and more in this situation report. There are basically daily reports about strikes against Ukraine. Most of the time, Kiev is also hit. One of the bigger reports was another strike with Iskander ballistic missiles. Ukraine says Russia used 10 of them and they were able to intercept all of them. We have now a video of actually a missile striking close to the GUR headquarters, so the headquarters of the military intelligence. It is identified here as a P-800 Onyx, as a anti-ship missile with a secondary ground attack capability, and we see the strike here hitting the water next to it, but that doesn't mean it has not been damaged. This is the building and we see visible damage. From the strength of the damage, it seems like it might have been hit by a Shahid, as the Shahid is roughly carrying 3 times the amount of explosives of a 155mm grenade, and it has visible damage that should not just be fragments of a close strike in the water specifically, but that might have been a direct hit. But if it was, then it should be a fairly small one, so maybe a Shahid, but definitely not an Iskander or a Kinshal or anything close to this. The Russians claim again that Patriot has been hit, but we have no confirmation whatsoever, like the first time. While we had confirmation by the US the last time that part of the Patriot battery had actually been hit, they claimed the damage was so light that everything is back in order and is workable again. Pictures, as far as I've seen, never surfaced. There are some satellite images which are extremely blurred that might indicate that a hit or even 2 hits have actually been achieved in the battery, but as said, they are so blurred that it isn't much to be seen. So while we have the claims by the Ukrainians, we simply don't know it, and would have to take one side for face value. Is it possible that they have hit it? It probably is, but we have no proof whatsoever. When it comes to the northern front line, as we should start calling it, there has been another incursion over the front line. We have videos here of battles going on. We hear fighting. We see fighters. I call them Ukrainian fighters, so supposedly they are the Russian Volunteer Corps RDK and the Freedom of Russia Legion LSR. Supposedly all of them are Russian citizens, even though at least one has been identified as a Belarusian citizen. So supposedly they are not Ukrainian citizens, but they are equipped, staffed, based in Ukraine. They are using Ukraine's uniforms. They are using the identification for friend and foe of Ukraine, so it's easier to simply call them the Ukrainians than the Russians, even if they might technically be Russians. So they were crossing over, having battles here, and the crossing actually happened here at this point. Here's Belgorod. This is where it happened the last time. It seems that they captured the town of Novotavloshanka, and they claimed they reached the outskirts of Shebekino and withdrew after that over the border. Now, obviously, the claims are fairly wild. We have videos, though, of them apparently destroying a heavy self-propelled mortar and an ammo truck, and we see other videos here where you can see it like this, where battles are going on. We see these soldiers lying here, and that was supposedly on the outskirts of Shebekov, I think was the name. So while there was actually battle going on, we don't see that much because both sides contradict each other again, as it's usually. The Russians are saying, there are also claims that it was prepared with an artillery bombardment and with drone attacks in the whole region here. And the Russians are saying 2 motorized infantry companies have had crossed with tank support. The defense was done with 20 border guards and 20 conscripts, and they should have supposedly were more or less successful. Other reports are talking about squad, by the way, not company. Company is the German word, so that's in my head. Other numbers are saying it was just one squad and it was defended. They were fighting against 10 defenders. Whatever happened, it's clear that there was no conquest of territory. They might have shortly controlled Novotavloshanka, but they retreated over the border. So I guess we can call it some kind of raid, that it's meant for propaganda terms to gain Russia's attention. It's while it technically is an invasion, it's not meant to capture and hold territory. It has clearly defined limits to what it's supposed to do, probably to draw Russian attention, to force the Russian to station more troops along the border, even though the Russians seem to simply use conscripts for that which they can't or which they don't want to use inside Ukraine as of now. The Russians are claiming they destroyed one T-72B, and another one has then been abandoned by the crew, which was too afraid to be struck as well with an airstrike. So they basically bailed out and ran away, and that second T-72B was captured. That at least was one claim I saw. I have not seen conclusive evidence. It seems though that one was definitely hit. The Ukrainian sides claim, no, one was just damaged and we were able to bring it over the border. But again, there, I haven't seen any evidence apart from the fact that one T-72 has pretty surely been hit at that border raid. Basically, we can say it's mostly aimed for propaganda purposes, these crossings, for fixing Russian troops and to destroy limited amounts of material and personnel. The overall goal, while the participants that are Russian citizens claim that they want to free Russia from Putin's dictatorship, this is surely not a way how they are going to succeed anytime soon. The Russians were responding basically in the same way though, and while it has been here was the fighting. Interestingly enough, just a few kilometers away, let's just measure this here real quick. Just 20 kilometers away, the report was that the Russians tried to cross over to Selene and were defeated there. So in a very close proximity, supposedly the fighting is going on. Border crossings from both sides are at least attempted. On the Eastern Front, not much has changed. So some changes are. Masyutivka, the Russians have probably gained some tiny positions. Other than that, fighting a little bit in this area is reported. Fighting at Kyslivka is being reported, at Novoselivske, and further south we have fighting around Kreminna. No changes in control of territory, not much change here. Further south of the Siversky Donetsk, which is the river here, we have fighting reported of Bilohorivka, of Spirne, Orikhovo, Vasilivka, which is here. There's also, the Russians are saying the Ukrainians tried to attack close to the Berychivske reservoir, which should be this here. So they were basically trying to advance in that direction. They claim they defeated it. Khomove, there was fighting for it. And further south in the region of Klishivka and Ivanivske, so more or less in this area, there supposedly was some fighting too. In this area, I have no confirmation of any change of territorial possession whatsoever, so the fighting is clearly dying down at that region, despite some sides still apparently doing some offensive operations. Avdiivka, the usual. Krasnohorivka, fighting is continuing. Supposedly they might have gained one single position here. That seems at least to be the case, so they might have had a success here. Then Opytne, Siverne, and Nevelske, fighting is continuing. No change in territory here. Marinka, the fighting is intensified here. The Chechens have arrived and are now seem to take over in Marinka, and further south at Pobieda, the fighting is also continuing. There's also, again, claims that the Ukrainians gained some ground in that territory. I don't really see the proof yet, but it's even from Wargonzo, again, claiming that the Ukrainians gained some territory, so it might be true, as Wargonzo is one of Russia's propagandists, one of the mill bloggers that is supporting Russia's invasion. And from a standpoint of source criticism, it's obviously more likely that Ukrainian successes that are claimed are true if they are being published by the Russian side. Nevertheless, no fundamental changes whatsoever along the whole front line here. And on the southern front line, it's basically the same. We have obviously artillery fire. There's still some activity going on here on the islands in the Dnipro, but that's to harass, and that's reconnaissance. That's not any serious amphibious operation that is happening. Other than that, strikes in the rear areas of the Russians are continuing. We have videos here where it was actually close to the harbor that strikes had happened here. And we see another video here. So in Berdyansk, the Ukrainians obviously struck something. The target is unknown as of now, and the expectations are that storm shadows have been used for this attack. So to summarize the developments along the front line, we can say that from the reports, the Kadyrovtsi have now been moved to Donetsk, here in the Donetsk region, the Donetsk front line. They are likely going to focus on Marinka. There are some speculations whether they might also try to focus on Avdiivka. Whatever it is, the Chechens have mostly saved themselves over the last few months, so the losses they have suffered should be fairly light, and they should be fairly fresh. So this might be of some use to the Russian side. On the other hand, it clearly seems to be an attempt by Kadyrov to also be able to present a personal success by his private army, like Prigozhin, who can now claim that he captured Bakhmut. Obviously, even according to the Russians, they control 70% of Marinka. If the Kadyrovtsi, if the Chechens are able to capture Marinka, then Kadyrov could claim that it was his success. This is coinciding with verbal attacks from Kadyrovtsi and from Prigozhin against each other, trying to basically diminish the successes of the others or claim that they don't even know what they have achieved, and so on and so forth. Generally, though, the possibility is that this is one of the results of the talk between Putin and Kadyrov. I think it was in March, where Kadyrov seemed to be really nervous and defensive, and supposedly on the 20th of May there was another meeting between Kadyrov and Putin, which coincided more or less with the end of Wagner's fighting in Bakhmut, where the end was visible, where it should have been clear that Wagner is, at least for now, a spent force, that it will have culminated after the capture of Bakhmut. So it's likely that Putin then talked to Kadyrov, it's time for you to bring your boys in, and that seems to be happening. Because the Kadyrovtsi have not really fought any serious not done any serious fighting since they were involved in the capture of Mariupol and later at the capture of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. They were fighting around Bilohorivka, but we're talking about several thousand men. Even according to Kadyrov, supposedly 7,000 Kadyrovtsi are in Ukraine, and their whole success, supposedly they were focusing on Bilohorivka, and as we can see, even months afterwards, Bilohorivka is still under Ukrainian control. So the Chechen success was non-existent around Bilohorivka. While they were not fighting on the front line, they were more or less the second line troops behind the front line. We've seen videos where they seem to force other Russian soldiers to return to the front line, basically some kind of military police or political commissars, making sure that the frontline troops don't give up positions, don't avoid fighting. But that obviously helped them preserve their own strength in comparison to this. When we talk about the front line here and the battle battle for Bakhmut, the British Ministry of Defense did a calculation now, and they said in the whole battle of Bakhmut, the Russians advanced 29 kilometers. That is all. They suffered 60,000 losses over this, and in calculated down to the days they used it, the Russians advanced 48 centimeters per day. That's obviously far, far slower than a snail would crawl at the same time. The Ukrainian counterattacks around Bakhmut clearly seem to have been the usage, the exploitation of local weaknesses, of local weakness, weak and demoralized troops that were holding the flanks. As we see them basically having stopped now, more or less having stopped, as we saw that it was mostly infantry with some artillery support, no real mechanized attacks, especially no real troop concentration. It seems more and more clear that this was not an attempt which was indicated by the lack of a lot of heavy weaponry anyways, but this was not an attempt to encircle Bakhmut, but it seems more that they used the weakness of the Wagner flanks to allow a safe evacuation from the last defenders of Bakhmut by making sure they won't be cut off. Their lines of communication in and out of the rest of Bakhmut was safe. That in that part was successful, but as we can say, the lack of further advancements clearly shows that at least for now, the Ukrainians don't seem to intend to either liberate Bakhmut again or encircle the troops, maybe create a turning maneuver or anything like this. There doesn't seem to be any attempts like this. We have a picture here. This is from the Crimean Bridge, supposedly showing cracks in the foundations. Now, I live in an earthquake region, and seeing cracks in walls isn't that rare to me, so I can't judge whether this is supposedly showing that the bridge is about to fall apart or whether that is just harmless. If you know more, if you're a structural engineer, feel free to comment in the comment section and enlighten us all, but I have no clue whether or not that is of any significance. I can just show you what we see here. The Russian troop formation and troop generation is also continuing, or the debates about it. There was an attempt to reading of a proposed law that would exclude PhD candidates and science doctorates, finished science doctorates from mobilization, but it was declined. That shows that the Duma is not willing to protect its scientific intelligence from a potential usage as cannon fodder on the front line. Whether that is smart in a country that should think long-term is a different story, though. At the same time, now the reading will start for a law that legalizes the recruiting of prisoners of penal colonies in times of war, mobilization, or martial law. So far, it apparently was not fully legal because supposedly to sign a contract with the military, you had to have a clean sheet, I think. So basically no priors. This is now being changed. The only one excluded are extremists and political criminals. So if you're a terrorist, if you're incarcerated for political crimes, you are excluded, but from what I see, it does not include heavy crimes like murder, rape, or anything like this. They might still be recruited. And part of that law would be that if they sign the treaties and probably finish their term, they will be exonerated, they will be pardoned. There are reports that schools in Russia will now try to teach children how to assemble and to fly drones to apparently either increase the production by using child labor, if you want to call it like this, or to create future drone operators. That doesn't mean at all that suddenly we're going to see children flying drones on the front line while the men fight. Obviously, you could read that out of this, but I think we should wait until we see it here. And of course, it's could probably be called a smart move to use the playfulness and the labor potential of school children, even if they just do it for 2 hours a week. That would probably increase the output of drones if they just assemble the pieces and save workers at another point, because the Russian economy is suffering from severe labor shortages, and using potential hands to do work doesn't seem to be the most stupidest idea. The Ukrainian GUR is saying the Russians are spending $17 million, converted obviously, to build big refrigeration buildings, or what do you call it? Like refrigeration installations. Let's use that word, in Rostov-on-Don and in Kursk. Supposedly to store fallen Russian soldiers here. Now, whether that or not is true, whether they actually spend that much, and what do they want to store them for? To keep them there until they are buried, to spread out the burials, to make it not look that big. So there would be a lot of speculation, and then again, according to source criticism, obviously the Ukrainian intelligence agency, the military intelligence agency's messages, reports always have to be taken with some grain of salt. Just because they say it doesn't mean it's true. So I can just report that it does, that the GUR is claiming that this is happening. Whether that makes so much sense or not, you can decide for yourself. In the political sphere, we already talked about it, that there are attacks between Chechen leaders, be it military, be it political, outside of Kadyrov, against Prigozhin. Igor Girkin, also with the nom de guerre Strekov, was claiming that Kadyrov is trying to use that to distance himself from Prigozhin, because he sees that his value, the relationship between the two, brings no value to him whatsoever. So he's trying to get away from him, to basically create distance, that he doesn't get any fallout in case something happens with Prigozhin, because he has not made a lot of friends lately. The Ukrainian Prosecutor General Andriy Kostin said that 2,900 crimes against children have been registered, and he said that 19,400 deportations of children are also registered. But he's sure that this is not only a fraction of the actual deportations; those are the ones that the Ukrainian authorities know about. He's also said that 483 school children have been killed in the war so far. 989 further school children have been wounded. Putin is now saying that adults in the conquered territory should be checked in medical terms as well. Their health should be checked as well, after it had been so successful with the children's. We reported here, we talked here about it in the past, that under the guise of medical checks, the deportations are happening, or at least the Ukrainians are saying it's deportations. Obviously, the Russians are calling it medical evacuations, vacations, R&R, and whatever. You get the point. What the point is here is obviously not fully clear, but it could help with future mobilizations if the Russians properly register everyone and know at the same time how healthy that person is, whether it could be used for forced generation as well. There are claims that Moldova will allow Ukraine to capture Transnistria, or is even asking around it. Those are spreading around right now. I have found no hard evidence whatsoever of this happening, so it seems unlikely that this is true. It's probably, again, some guys on Twitter trying to make themselves important, but at least I have not found any proof that this is anywhere close to it. What we do have is that Zelensky said that they can't do anything unless Moldova asks them for help, and I have not found that the Moldovan president has said that she's asking for actual help or is giving the Ukrainians permission to do anything about the Russian soldiers in Transnistria. There's a Finnish publication claiming that Putin is no longer giving orders, that he is basically delegating everything and is not doing any of the actual, is not responsible for the actual decisions anymore. That's probably attributed to his health. But then again, how often has he supposed to have died by now from cancer, or Shoigu, or Lukashenko? So we should wait and see what that turns to. I'm just reporting that there are the claims coming around, but I don't take them credible until I see any proof of this, which I have not seen so far. There is claims here about it's in German, but they're basically saying that the Russian economy is suffering. According to the Russians themselves, the industrial production has decreased by 5% from March to April alone, the industrial production. and they are suffering from a massive labor shortage because they've lost about 1 million people leaving the country due to the war. I'm not completely sure if that includes the mobilized personnel as well, which obviously has been taken out of the labor market as well. But at least according to this, the Russian production is already suffering severely for that. I don't claim to be knowledgeable in that regard. You obviously find the absolute opposite as well, claims that Russia's economy is doing fantastic. I'm not claiming that I know better, that I have an idea about this. Again, here I'm just reporting what I found. There's a report that the US are paying 118 million US dollars to the company of Global Military Products Incorporated to buy and repair Cheetah or Gepard AAA, self-propelled AAAs. You can see one here. It's specifically, the thing is, the contract says they are being restored in Jordan, and Jordan owns Gepard self-propelled air defense tanks like the one you see here. They have bought 60 of them from the Netherlands a while ago, used ones which actually look a little different. The radar system is different, so it's like a flat bar. It's a bar here instead of that dish, so it's fairly easy to differentiate. And as they are being repaired in Jordan, it seems to be clear that they will be from Jordan. Now, whether Jordan has donated them or whether the US were able to convince them to sell them is obviously a different story. But at least it seems that Ukraine will be able to expect further Gepard or Geparden in the future. There are reports that AIM-7 Sparrow will be delivered to Ukraine. This is basically the precursor of the AIM-120 AMRAAM, so a medium range, beyond visual range air-to-air missiles, but it's semi-active radar homing, so it needs a radar to basically illuminate the target, which forces a plane to keep flying in its direction, which is the reason why it's completely obsolete. The Ukrainians right now for their Air Force only have semi-active radar homing as well, which gives them a huge disadvantage in air combat against the Russian forces. And it seems extremely unlikely that they will be integrated in Ukrainian planes because it's close to impossible, and it would take immense effort trying to implement an obsolete missile. What seems likely is that those AIM-7 Sparrows will be used for Cub and Buk TEL, so the air defense systems, the Soviet ones, because there have actually been tests in the past with both those systems to use the Sea Sparrow, which is a relative of the regular AIM-7 Sparrow, and they have been successfully implemented in Buk and Cub to be able to use them from Ukraine's air defense systems, which are running out of missiles, at least according to the Pentagon or Discord leaks. And finally, we have a video here for you kids out there. I have no idea about it, but supposedly this is showing some anime stuff, and you even see it in pink. According to the magazine, we see that it's an AK-74, and apparently someone has made it nicer for himself. And it's demonstrated here. I thought it was kind of like a weird thing that might be interesting to at least some of you. Here we have a video of a Sukhoi 24 Fencer with two Storm Shadows. Now we have a picture of it in the sky. It's being used from the Fencer, and yeah, this is an example. And finally, we have a small video here about a Ukrainian remotely controlled, what do you call it, robot to lay mines. What we see here is an anti-tank mine that it's dropping, and supposedly it's around in operation around Vuhledar, which might be at least in part to blame for the Russian tank losses there as well, as this thing can obviously much more easily and deploy mines without the Russians seeing it, and it can deploy mines at positions much more under enemy fire control because if you lose just that little thing, it's far less of a loss than losing actual personnel in the attempt of it. That was it already from me for now. As said, the front line is not happening too much yet. We need to more focus on the elements that are happening around it. We see the Ukrainian preparation for their counteroffensive, for instance, with those Storm Shadow strikes on Berdyansk. All of this can clearly be seen as a preparation, as a shaping of the battlefield and striking the Russian logistics in the rear areas, even attacking refineries to probably mid-turn start fuel problems along the front line. But the offensive itself, the active fighting part on the ground, has not started yet. That was it from me for now. Thank you for watching. And if you like this, please hit the thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm, as do comments. So please leave a long comment for the algorithm. If you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. And if you like what I do, this channel is only possible because of the support from viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everyone who has already supported it. This was it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.